nationwide. It's a big challenge. Got to get everybody on board from all brokerages. There's different co-ops I'm a member of as far as MLS boards, and they all are just, they're all kind of their own little niche in what they serve. However, I would say in general, Lands in Texas is the go-to. And it's public, so it kind of takes away from a lot of it. The nostalgia of being an agent and feeling like you have inside info. But people do not know how to set up a search, and it's not that difficult to go set up a search just like the MLS. Yes.
On Land in Texas, if I found something, say a client might be interested, is the agent's information that has a listing on there as well?
Yes, it will be on there. Even as a paid member with an upgraded membership, if I print a flyer, it's still on there to send it to someone else. But again, it just goes back to the conversation, communication, relationship you have with the buyer. It's not a concern I have generally.
The reason I'm asking this is I want to know who I can reach out to ask questions about that land.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's the way they're listed, it has all that information too. So I'm an advertiser on Land Watch for a certain region, northeast region of Texas, and I show up like every third listing anywhere you search within like 8 counties in northeast Texas. So people associate me, like that's the way it's designed. They associate me with all those listings, but they often call me and I'm like, yeah, we set up a show. I'm not the listing agent. And then they don't have a problem with it, but all the info is there for them to learn just as easily. So again, takes away from the whole MLS search to where, you know, they feel like you only have that information when they see it, but oftentimes they just reach out to you because you send it to them. So let's see. Other questions?
Mine, so my family owns a farm in Blue, Texas, which is like a small town USA. But we know people who are looking to buy, and they have formed a good relationship with people down there. So I didn't know how I went about obtaining MLS, or it's Lee County, Texas, which is when I look at Lee County, Texas realtors, there's no like Collin County Association like that I can just join. So I didn't know how to go about obtaining all of their listings, but Lands in Texas seems like the best.
Sure. And if you're a member on it, then you can actually look at comps. They provide sold data for the most part. You can get some pretty decent comps as long as there's a lot of activity in the area. Now, again, it goes back to relativity. So if you have 500 acres in Lee County, like you're not looking at Lee County for 500 acres that are sold. You're looking there and like 3 levels of contiguous counties, because there's only going to be 10 comps in the last 3 years that are 400 to 700 acres. Yeah. So there's not a whole lot of properties like that that sell. So then you kind of have to go back and you've got to restructure it from where you're getting your numbers. We can talk a lot more about that too if you guys want, as far as how I come up with pricing strategies and that kind of stuff. Another thing going into it, as far as rural real estate goes, I'm talking like 5+ acres outside of town, not necessarily development type land. However, going back into that, a lot of times that's a conversation I have to have with people, is to say, hey, you're trying to sell a ranch, but this is not the highest and best use. Like the highest and best use, and I think you've probably got some of this property right now, is for development. And the farmer's like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, like you can get probably 30 to 50% more per acre if we were to sell this as development land instead of farm and ranch. And they're like, okay, what's that look like? Well, it looks like a lot more work and maybe some input from the person selling if they want to maximize that. Or it could be that they're in a hot enough location that doesn't matter. And also, it's not going back to 1 acre lots that are subdivided from a builder. I don't really mess with that stuff. That's a whole different animal. So as far as land goes, land development side of things, it's not necessarily in the rural aspect of it. However, it is something that we look at. I often bring in a lot of other parties whenever we look at that. I've actually been talking to a guy in North Texas that has a few hundred acres that's looking to develop, and that's a project we're probably going to take on this year. And there's a lot of opportunity in that. So if you get that type of person, like, don't hesitate. Give me a call, and I've got connections to get you going down that path of development. Talking to a guy in Florida that's a kid agent, and they went from 4.9 million in production 2019 to like 44 million because he got on board with someone that wanted to develop some land. And 1 year, 10x the business. So the opportunities are there.
So the challenge that I've been running into is the agent has no information for me, like what are the restrictions? Oh, I don't know. So I'm having to call the city and talk to the people there and say, okay, what are restrictions? Like yesterday I found out this piece of land is zoned agriculture. And I'm like, that's kind of odd because the area it's in, you would think that. So the guy has to build 1 acre lots, 1 acre, each home has to be a 1 acre lot. He doesn't want to do that. Or I'll say, is this a floodplain? Well, we're not really sure. We think it is, but I'm like, how can I be that person to call my buyer and say, well, we're not real sure. I don't want to be that agent. I want to have all the information they need to make a good decision on whether that's parcel to them.
Sure. And going back specifically, I'll hit on one thing. As far as our MLS goes, if you pull up the address on the map, you can click to show it on the map. You zoom in close enough to where you can see the parcel boundaries, and you go up to your layers, you can select the flood, and it'll show you if it's in a floodplain.
Well, some of them, like I had one yesterday, was 10 acres, and 7 acres of the 10 were in floodplain. I'm like, how are we going to sell that? Like, how do you sell something like
They're
that?
right by.
It's people who just want the land.
Yeah.
Like, because the acre we bought, and we just want a link. So there are people who just buy the land.
Yeah, if you've got 3 acres, that's more than enough to build a house, and then you just have 7 acres for fun.
That no one's going to touch and kids can run through it. Have you asked people about the rezoning? How much is it rezoned? So like if it is zoned ag, but they want to zone it for residential, how much does that cost to get rezoned?
That is kind of specific.
Okay.
Well, she told me he could build houses. It's what he's looking for, a tract of land to build houses on. But his house would have to be on 1 acre lots. Like he have to build 1 lot. His 1 acre.
So that's, again, going back to development, the ins and outs, you have to, from what I've found, is you need an engineer. You gotta have a good site survey, and then you get an engineer. The engineer comes in and evaluates the limitations of the nearest city or whatever jurisdiction it's in. Then they can design it, lay it out like that, to where the city is going to approve it or most likely to approve it. And then you present it to the city approves it, and then you go into the development phase. However, you do have to go through the rezoning process, depending on where it's at. If you buy land just outside of the city jurisdiction, it's going to be a lot easier. And then it might get annexed in the future, but that's not going to be the developer's problem, unless they're developing it during the annexation. But that's going to be a process. That's probably not.
What's the ETJ?
Extraterritorial jurisdiction. In a nutshell, it's another tax agency. It's like a MUD or a PUD or yeah. They're all specific to location. You're not always going to run into an ETJ or a district. Again, going back to the farm and ranch types, we're looking outside of city limits. We're talking in the country. We're talking opportunities for you guys to expand conversations with your clients. Like, people that have land, they want to sell the development. Obviously, everyone wants to sell their land to maximize their profit on it, no matter what their intention is. They want the most money they can get for it. You've got a family ranch down south that obviously, if they would sell, they want to get as much as possible for it. So you want to find that target niche that needs to be advertised to. It's likely going to be hunters. There's not a whole bunch of growth out there except rocks and brush. So you're probably targeting hunters And that's a whole different niche as opposed to farmers that are going to grow corn and cotton. So it's such a diverse portion of real estate that personally, I don't think most people that focus on residential real estate, like within the city limits, are even aware of. And these are conversations that tie back to agents that are specifically doing like luxury listings. Like you don't tie in Island Park to farm and ranch. People don't think about that. I run around with a bunch of people in Highland Park that all own ranches. Like it's big money. But if you were at a listing appointment in Highland Park, you probably wouldn't be thinking about the fact that they own multiple properties. You're probably sitting there thinking about the house you're sitting in. So it's another conversation to be had that, again, you set it up for a referral, depending on what it is, like, if you're sending me a 7-figure referral, we're going to get flexible real quick. I mean,
So my deal, I just sold a piece of land in Sanger. In Sanger, this was like 3 acres or something, and it was over 100 grand. So I've got somebody that has a place that's in Whitesboro. It's got a house that sits on 3.5 acres that's cut out, fenced in kind of deal. They wanted to sell the whole thing, 120 something acres at once. So I do the research, and there's a bunch of land for sale, been sitting, but anywhere between 12,000 an acre, 15,000 an acre, just sitting for 180 days, 300 days, So the house is on 60 something acres. Across the street is another 60 something acres, of which all is in Grayson County, except like 4 acres on the back is in Cook County. So I was thinking to divide it up into like 11-acre plots. And you would maximize the deal that way, plus be able to sell it. It wouldn't sit. But if we cut the house out and sell it by itself on the 3.5 acres, do we list it as residential, or is that farm and ranch, and then all the rest of the land separate? That's.
And again, specific to that location, it kind of depends on the layout that you can get from it. I would probably, it also depends on your target. So our MLS, I think I worded this. We have a farm and ranch input option in our MLS, and you have a residential input option in our MLS. I search both whenever I'm looking for anything. It's not a habit that I feel like a lot of city agents do, just because what would they have to do if they're looking for a 8 acre in Plano, 3-bed, 2-bed house? They're just not going to click on farm and ranch. I do it naturally, even when I'm searching for houses in Plano, and I'm like, I hope I don't need to do that, but it's just a habit. So going back to, do I input it as farm and ranch? If it's a house in 3 acres, I'd probably just do residential, because more agents that aren't familiar with farm and ranch are going to find it. And that's taking care of their seller.
Do you like the farm and ranch would scare people away too? Because it's only 3 acres? Or like the best farm and ranch?
Again, it would depend on the features and amenities in my opinion. I've seen some really nice setups for equestrian facilities, equestrian properties on 2 or 3 acres. And you're like, I don't know how they fit all that on there and run efficiently, but it happens. I've sold $1 million places that were 5 acres that had 40 stalls on it. And it was efficient. Like there was pasture space. Like I don't know how there's that many horses on it. But it works. So it kind of depends, again, property specific and who you're targeting. I don't count on the MLS to sell those types of properties for me. It's one of those things that I'm proactively selling. For example, we got a 270-acre listing in Pittsburgh, Texas. We just put on the market last week. I've shown it twice and we got offers on it. And it's a 7-figure listing. And that one did not come through the MLS. They found it through our marketing online. And again, it's more about knowing where to put those. So again, focus on Folks on the property, who's going to buy it? It's been pretty easy in town. And I speak on the city stuff because that's obviously where I started and still do some of it. But it was super easy since I've gotten in this business, just price a house right in the city, put it on the MLS, and it's sold. Like, it's been really easy. You don't really have to think about your buy. But in the farm and ranch side of things, you really have to think about who's going to be the focus of that property, and then how do you get in front of them. I still utilize Facebook like crazy. I'm in 1,000 groups on Facebook, probably. And it's just a daily routine almost that I'm pushing property out to specific groups based on the use of the property. It might be the same property, and I'll word it in the catchphrases and description differently to target those people that I know are just going to read that first line and move on. So if I put it in a horse group, I'm going to have that first couple of lines talking about how it's going to, make sense for a horse property buyer to look into it, or it's got great grazing. I'm putting it in like farming group, ranching groups, cattle groups. It's crazy the connections because you think about, okay, it's a $1 million, $2 million, $5 million listing. Those people probably aren't on Facebook like scrolling that can afford to buy these things. However, their assistants are, and the people that work for them, and the people that are closest to them that don't have that money but know everything about them might be spending time there. Where they go, hey, have you seen this? And then they go, yeah, give me more information on that. And then you get connected. So don't discount Facebook on a price point of a house or a property. Same thing with luxury houses too. I mean, the doctors and lawyers and, self-made millionaires that can afford a luxury listing, they're probably not on it, but the kids are. And their kids are going to show the parents, hey, really want this swimming pool in the lot. Just stop. I get a lot of questions about lenders and loan products. Usually just leads to me asking a lot of questions. People probably get really annoyed with me because I'm not quick to give a response. But it's because there are so many different types of lenders for land. And it depends on the scenario. Again, going back to just buying a half acre or 1 acre lot home site to building or to buying a farm that's actually income producing on crops. Like there's 10 different lenders with specific niches in those areas to where I could get a first time farm and ranch buyer, like a business loan to buy a horse training facility if I can show that they have experience as like an apprentice doing it. Like I can get them into a specific loan product to buy something, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 if I can show that this property creates income on their abilities to train horses. So it's not always like, I need an FHA lender or I need a conventional loan on this house. Another portion of that is, are your improvements worth more than the land? That adjusted down payment. If the land is worth more than the improvements, you're likely spending no less than 15% down payment. So that's something to keep in mind. Most likely 20%. If it's a second property, 20%. If it's income producing, most likely it's 20%.
So maybe, is there any way around 20%? Say a friend is looking to enter, but she wants to buy acreage now, but it doesn't. So is there any way around that? It's just not making an income.
She better. Get you married her. That's really about the only way. Veterans Land Board does 5% down, I believe, up to $150,000 in value. And then I believe it's 20 or 25% down on the additional above that. But they get basically $150,000 in land value at 5% down to the Texas Veteran Land Board.
other challenge I'm having is trying to get a lender to call me back.
Yes, so you're probably familiar with how difficult it is to find a good lender in general. Then you narrow that down to only like, 1 in 100 do land loans, and now you've got even less to choose from. This is a constant battle with us as well. I'll call and do a deal with one this month and call them back and do a deal next month and then quit and move to a different company, and I have to learn all their new products. It's a pain in the butt. And you have some that only work certain regions. It's like if you get in with a credit union or primarily credit unions, they're just going to be local or regional to where they say, no, we don't want that area, but call so-and-so at our branch over there. And they have a lot more restrictions and limitations. Primarily, they're covering their own butts because, what if land doesn't move? It's easier to offload a house than it is undeveloped land. So that's why it's a little bit harder to purchase the land. We use the heritage land out of the state a lot. They cover a big area. What's this other one?
Heritage one?
Heritage Land Bank.
I have a guy I'm working with right now, his name's Jeremy Gill, he's with American National.
Yeah, I had some buyers use them on some farmland, I believe.
I found that when we were buying ours, the best thing that we did was find a local bank. We did all this stuff in-house. And
Yeah.
that has been like a magician with doing stuff.
And they'll know more. They'll know more about the property most likely, especially if they've had it before. And a lot of times, if you just ask the seller who they used to purchase it, that makes it even easier. Because we know that property. We know the producers, or we've had good luck with that property. We'll loan on it. They've already got a file on it. Ag Texas is another one. Farm Credit Services is another one. Capital Farm Credit. That's the last guy. I got 3 lenders of Capital Farm Credit. Any questions from the computer behind me? They can hear us.
I kind of don't know how to word this question. So
Say it. Figure it out.
my aunt is wanting to buy land, but she wants to put like multiple like tiny homes on it.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if there's any kind of restrictions as far as that goes before it turns like potentially like commercial, because it has all these different residences on it.
Sure.
So I don't know how
So I
that
would go to
works.
the tax assessor, county tax assessor, or appraisal district, appraisal office, and talk to them, tell them the plan, and just say, what are my limitations? They not look at you, absolutely no.
I mean, because it's not to rent out or anything. She's planning on like my mom living there when she retires, and her and then her kids, like.
Their biggest concern, so for one, if it's income producing.
Right.
It's probably gonna go commercial then.
Right, and that's not the intent, it's just family members, like to have property in.
So I sold one property that was 85 acres. It had a residence. It had 7 basically hotel rooms on it, if you will. And then 80 additional acres of just grazing. And it had a 26 dogs and all sorts of fun stuff. But they had that one divided up where there was like 12 acres residential, 3 acres commercial, and then 70 acres of ag, all in one parcel.
Okay.
So they can divide it up.
The farther you're out
Yeah.
in Lake County, it's so easy to work with them. Like we have 30 acres, 5 of them are homestead, and we are about to make 1 a residential, and then few long-term, we'll make 2 acres commercial, and we have corn growing on the rest of it.
Okay.
So they literally will just like let us play and move things around, but I think it's like in the country, it's so much easier
So-
to like.
Well, also
work
in
with them.
Salina and like Blue Ridge.
Yeah, those are gonna get, do it now. And try to get grandfathered in whatever changes, because 10 years, those are gonna be totally different.
Yeah.
One of the bigger concerns that the county has, most counties have, and not even all counties yet, is the septic systems. They're wanting permits on septic systems, primarily for environmental reasons, just to know that you're not dumping on the ground. Then if you're close to a lake or something like that, then you're gonna get more restrictions on that.
And she wants a pond or a lake or something on it.
Yeah, they're not gonna, if it's private like that, if it's not a core lake or anything, you're not gonna run into any problems, but if it's a core engineer's lake, you get too close to them, they're gonna have different restrictions, and they're usually not even more difficult, they're just additional, or they might not allow traditional systems, it'll only be aerobic, and some people just don't like the sprinklers, so they only want traditional. So that's something to keep in mind in your land searches for buyers, is are they gonna have a problem with an aerobic system?
What about when you come across property that we're just talking about, the seller wants to retain mineral rights?
Very common. I tell people coming, especially from out of state, most Texans that have some life in, outside of the city, they understand it and they get it. And it's a strong criteria, or it's not. And some people are like, we absolutely have to have mineral rights in whatever we buy. I'm like, okay, that's great to know, because that's a conversation that's going to save me a lot of job time. I have it on the front end and say, hey, and a lot of times too, if you find a property online that shows the minerals are excluded, call the agent and double check. Most of the time, I don't write that the minerals are excluded on my listings. I do get the reservation addendum signed by my sellers to keep the minerals, and it's included, but it's almost always negotiable. I rarely have a client that has to keep them unless it's in production. So it's almost always negotiable. However, people coming from out of state, I just give them the expectation from the start. I'm like, hey, it's Texas, it's oil. People don't want to split it. They don't want to get rid of it if they own it. I was like, but in all honesty, most of these people that have owned their properties less than 10 or 15 years probably don't even have it. And like the guy the deal I'm working on right now, he thinks he has 50%. He thinks he does, not for sure. And he's an old guy. And he bought it 12 years ago. He's like, I think I own 50%. He's like, but to be honest, we didn't search it.
So funny, I sold a home in a residential community in Burleson, Bedford. And they presented that to us, we wanted to retain minerals. I'm like, we're in the freaking city, what are you talking about minerals? But in Bedford, that's the thing.
Yeah. It's yeah, it was a big formation. How long have they owned the house,
Before my buyers bought it.
They might
It was
have been-
probably before the shale and all that,
Yeah.
that started fracking, all started going on.
might have been-
But I was telling her, if I bought a parcel of land, the guy wants to retain his mineral rights. 10, 15 years later, he wants to come dig up on my property, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that.
The city would not have. The new owner doesn't have anything to worry about. But there's going to be restrictions they're going to put that. And you can
Trespassing.
You can almost always, well, and I mean, an oil company needs land. Like their drill sites are multiple acres.
So when you say that you have a piece of land out in the country that guy wants to retain mineral rights, and you say that it's negotiable, is it negotiable by years? Like, we'll retain mineral rights for the next 30 years, after that, we don't get anything, sure.
It's negotiable. I wrote a contract one time for wind rights, and it was if the company doesn't put a windmill on in the next 10 years, then this contract is null and void. And I had to get an attorney involved in that. We didn't close on that deal. Luckily, I ended up negotiating the seller out of all of their rights for my buyers, and then my buyer backed out. We ended up negotiating all the rights. But yeah, that was the initial negotiations. The seller wanted to retain wind rights, which is not a right in Texas, but we had an attorney created. Yeah, everything's negotiable, literally. They had been approached by a wind energy company that provided them an offer to develop that land, but it was like a 50-year lease to say within X amount of time, we could put a tower on your property. And they had gone in and leased up like 30,000 acres. They have to lease up a certain amount before they can start construction. So they have to get all of these farmers on board. This is just south of Dallas and they have to have a certain radius of miles before they can ever put up a windmill. And so then it's just a lottery as to who's going to get the windmill, because if you get the windmill, it's good money. But we did a lot of research on that, and it showed like 30 to 50% immediate reduction in your land value. And nobody wants to buy that place after there's a windmill on it. So that's then what you're negotiating is what's it worth, because I can basically sell this. And then they're going to have ingress and egress, and I can't farm within a certain distance of that windmill. I can't use that land. They've got to run lines. Like there's all sorts of easements that go with it. So that's then what you're negotiating. You look at the initial contract, and it's like, oh wow, they're going to pay $45,000 a year just to have this windmill sitting there. And then you're like, okay, what does that do to the property value if they develop everything around it? My property could be worth a couple $100,000 an acre, but now I can't do anything with it. So those are, go back to everything's negotiable. You can get an attorney involved on mineral rights to set it up like that, as far as royalties go, production, timelines. And also, if you have those buyers that want to know how much, how much interest is being sold, go ahead and let them know it's going to be rare to find that without spending extra money. I think it's about $35 an hour, $65 an hour, plus the what do they call them? The abstracts. Whenever they go to title companies, those landmen that search those minerals, they have to pay for access to those documents, sometimes by the hour. So that's where the charges start to get out. I mean, it can be $100, $150 an hour plus travel charges, because a lot of these small towns and small counties out in the middle of nowhere, they don't have their documents online, and the landman will have to actually go to the courthouse and get an abstract that way to see it.
So you mentioned an attorney quite often. So is it often you have to get attorneys involved in land like this?
Big farm and ranch stuff. I mean, and then it kind of depends on the buyer and seller's preference. I've worked side by side with attorneys on several deals, and the attorneys are almost always fully aware of what's going on, to where they understand it's a mutual symbiotic relationship. Just this morning I was on a conversation with one, because she's drafting a purchase contract to have the verbiage of what the sellers want, because it's not in our farm ranch contract. It's an owner finance deal. So even our seller financing didn't address it the way that we're structuring. That's where a good attorney comes in and makes it easy. I've also sold big ones that are just as, a walk in the park. It's just like leave everything and, put keys under the mat. Here's the price. So it's, again, everything's negotiable. Sold cows, sold donkeys, sold chickens. Leave them on the property. We'll take it all. Horses, tractors, trucks, whatever.
But not the mineral rights.
Not the mineral rights. Those are held closer than cows. Never know.
So how do you get around that? Because people think that, JRE is going to show up.
Yeah.
Strike oil or gold or something.
I've found that it's almost always worth something to either party. And that's why I don't think I've ever had a seller that was dead set on keeping them. Like, we've always been able to come up with a value to it. And then I always tell them, hey, if I can advertise that the minerals are negotiable, like, your property just got a lot more attractive to people. It's like, it doesn't mean you have to sell them, it doesn't mean they come in at full price. It just means they're available. And then people see that and they go, let's find out what it looks like. And we say, well,
It gets that out of the conversation. Get it all the calls. Does it come with mineral rights? Does it come with mineral rights?
and it's one of those things that's like, okay, what does the structure of the deal look like? How long have we been on the market? How desperate is my seller? My seller really wants to sell, and someone brings them a full price offer asking for minerals, they might just take it. Like, oh, we didn't think we'd get full price, we kind of knew we'd negotiate a little bit, but they came in full price asking for minerals, they can have it.
So if we cut this 3.5 acre plot out of this 127 acres, do we give the mineral rights on that, you think?
Tough to sell it. I mean, it's kind of what is the likelihood? Is there current production? Do they know how much they own? Because that's another thing.
It was granddaddy's, so the percentage is high.
Probably, yeah, and that's, I would probably seek in writing what they have, because then again, you might get the negotiating hardball,
And then
and then they own like 4%.
how do you find that out? Who he is?
I've got a contact in Cindy that the research. And she's good. Like, she can do like a surface level and then kind of give you an estimate. Like, hey, here's what I found in 20 minutes, and it'll probably take you 6 hours to dig through all of it. Expect to spend $800 or something. Or she might say, hey, in 20 minutes I found 73 airs. This is going to take me like 2 weeks. It might be $3,000, $4,000. So, and that was one that we ran into on a 25-acre piece of land. It was actually 73 acres on the middle of the stage. So we're like, yeah, it's not worth fighting. We're going to spend more time to figure out who owns it.
Yeah. Next.
Cool. So yeah, minerals. Water's the same way. It's not that big of an issue in North Texas. Water's pretty abundant. Down south, it becomes a much larger issue as far as water rights. If you have a river on your property, you have lake frontage. We get to use the water, especially if you're going to use it for irrigation. There's additional charges. Some Corps of Engineer lakes will let you use the lake water for irrigation if you pay additional. On lakes, you're likely paying the Lake Authority on spec for any lake frontage. And then they just tack on for additional fees and for irrigation depending on the output. So water rights, again, it's kind of like a landman type job. It's not going to be something that's necessarily easily found at the title company. And they might not know about it. It's always easy too to just call the title company or ask the agent, hey, it looks like this buyer purchased this land 10 years ago. Can you see if they have records from their closing? You know who the title company was. And the agent might be like, oh yeah, I actually sold this land to them. We used such and such title company. Let me see if they have anything on record. Then they might actually have had the mineral search done and be able to provide it. So you have accuracy instead of the seller going, oh, like, 75%, and then you're on 7.5%. So,
It's got 7 in it.
yeah.
So your girl, is she a land man?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She's really good.
It's about $800 a day.
So it's usually, like I said, she'll give you an estimate. She'll give you a ballpark. She'll do a brief search, and it's a ton of information she'll give you generally on the brief search. And like, I don't think that's even at a cost. It's just so you have an expectation.
Right.
We thought, because she looked it up, she found where the minerals were. were likely kept in the county where the land was, and that county was like, where the courthouse plant, that's what they call those. The plant was 90 miles from where she lived. She had a home office, so she charged a mileage fee and then an hourly fee plus the cost of what it took for her to have access to the plant for the information. And she would say, I'm expecting to be there 3 hours to dig up this information. So plan on it being no more than, $700 for this day of research. I believe we will get to at least a point to where you tell me to keep going or we know, or to stop. And like because it's kind of one of those things, she doesn't know how to price it. She doesn't know if it's going to take her an hour or 2 weeks or more. She doesn't know how many people she's going to have to track down to make sure that it's active.
So she'll just do the initial thing first, give you an idea.
Give you an idea.
And then go further.
Yeah, she's, like I said, it's very transparent. We were very comfortable using her on multiple properties so far, and felt like she was very fair. And sometimes slow to respond initially because she's working for someone else by the hour, so she usually doesn't respond very quickly until like later at night. She might go, yeah, hey, I can start this project 2 days from now or whatever. I think she needs parcel ID county, and she can use it. Any additional information you can send.
That's different than just calling Laura and saying, hey, open title on this property.
Yeah.
Parcel ID one.
Usually parcel ID, and then just any details, address, county, how much acreage it is, and if the current landowner.
And we had a survey. So
Yeah, even if you can send them the survey, because she'll cross that to make sure the plats match on the map she's looking at, because they have certain software just for their industry. So she can go in and look at it and say, oh yeah, that's leased by such and such company that's producing. Their well is actually located on adjacent property to this. It's known as this. Like they're gonna have so much more information that she can just log in like we do the MLS. She does that for mineral rights. And so she can give a real in-depth brief overview and then tell you, hey, I expect it to take this long. She's been doing it for a long time.
Okay, cool.
I realized 11 o'clock. And then the structure that I just talking, so have a conversation. People leaving us up there. No questions up there. Y'all have any more questions? What can I go over? I gave y'all just, this is just, especially just the criteria worksheet that I go through when I'm talking to buyers and sellers. It's the same one. Just obviously, I'm not looking at how many beds or baths whenever I'm, asking specifics from a buyer, except for how many people want. But if there's something significant on the seller, a master bedroom is large or something, I'm going to include the sizes just like I would. As far as the MLS input goes, it's all the same as residential if it has a house. When photos come around, I'm usually aligning my photos to catch the attention of my target buyer. So you might not see a house first, even if it has a house. You might see a lake first, or you might see working pins for towel first, or you might see stalls first. I'm trying to catch the eye of the person I think is going to buy it. If it's a house and it's a horse-person shopping, they're going to click the next listing because they care more about the barn than the house. Same thing with the order of the pictures. I might show a lake, and then I might show the barn, and then I might show the house. And the house, since there are only 36 pictures, you might see a kitchen, a master bathroom, and a living area. And then an exterior photo or an aerial of the boundaries, and then I'm going to show lay of the land, features of the land, features of the barn, features of the amenities that may be. Lands of Texas allows us 100+ photos, so you can get a lot more information visually through Lands of Texas. Again, if you're searching MLS or something rural, always cross-check Lands of Texas, and you might find the same listing that has way more pictures that tell more story for you to get what you're talking about.
So you call that a working pen instead of a corral or whatever?
It just depends. Honestly, it's the region of the cowboy. And they all call it something different. And if you're in their crowd, wherever you're at, you call it the wrong thing, then they're gonna pick on you. And then next time you go to a different region, you call it what you got picked on for, then they're gonna pick on you. So there's no winning. I've worked cows all over the country and have called it a lot of things that I would never think to call it. And they use their own language. So just have fun with it. There's a lot of things that most people that are real deep in the industry, you tell them up front, hey, I've got minimal knowledge of how this works, but I know someone that can help, and you get with me, and then I'll set you up and I'll tee up your conversation so you know what you're looking for. I have no problem helping you guys whenever you want. Do y'all want my email? Clayton@ackerproperties.com. Yeah,
Yeah.
My cell phone.
Hey, Kristen's not here. I have no idea whether or not you're getting.
No, she's back. She's not in here.
Right. How do you go about vetting the clients that you get? So somebody comes in and is like, I want 30 acres for $1,000 an acre. Probably that they'll vet themselves that way.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, well, I don't drive that far west, but I can hook you up with somebody. But no, for the price, I have a general knowledge of prices of acreage in North Texas, and that kind of tells me if someone knows what they're after. Is their pricing, and then the size of the land. But if you're vetting them for pricing, I always, the same conversation, we're looking at take pasture and finance. And 1031 exchange. It's big. We're doing a lot of those right now because people are selling their land near the city to move further out and get away from the city. And they're making a lot of money, so they're able to buy a lot more land outside of town. It's a great conversation. I think going back to people who know that might have land, might have money, that want to grow. It's a great conversation to have, especially from a luxury people standpoint. They've got money tied up in land, places that they probably made a really nice investment choice at some point in time, and are now thinking, wow, that land is probably getting really valuable. Right now it's getting hot. And then they can flip that into a much larger property further out. And
You have to do the 1031 exchange. They've known it for a long time, so there's no real tax implications.
yeah, it would still be capital gains on the sale price.
Not going away this year too.
Capital gains tax.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting.
I think it's
It's got to go through a couple of other processes, and then they're doing gift tax on the inherited properties is looking to change. So yeah, definitely pay attention to those, but tax rates, capital gains taxes, short-term taxes, I'll always refer to a CPA on those things, but it's definitely a conversation to have. If they've owned a property less than a year, it's usually worth holding on to through the year, just so they get long-term gains instead of short-term gains. But it's going back to a percentage, upwards of 30%, 36% on some, of the difference in what they purchased it for versus what they sell it. My family got hit pretty hard on one of our farms as few parents decided last minute they just wanted to invest in the market. But yeah, they did. So it hurts. So you've got to set that up with a 1031 exchange intermediary prior to close. Now I've got those companies with on the contacts of those. We've done a few of them. It's super easy. Really no added input from our perspective as agents. It's like $1,000 for the buyer or for the seller buyer to do it. You have a strict timeline, 45 days from the date of close to identify your next purchase property. And you can choose up to 3. There's different strategies on how to do it, different ways to do it. But you can choose up to 3 properties, but you have to close on one of those 3 properties. So if you've got 3 in mind, you put them in writing, turn it over to the intermediary, say, we're going to choose between one of these, finish your vetting process, and purchase one of them within the next 135 days, you have to close.
On top of the 45 days.
It's a 180-day process total. You can do it in less, but that's the time you're allowed. Like I said, usually only $1,000 for that intermediary to be involved. That's like $700 for the sales side, $300.
So they're under the impression, I mean, they've had this land a while, it's been in the family for years, it's grandparents. But yes, they did inherit. But it's been over a year, is that the timeline, you say a year?
So that's an added layer of technicality, the inheritance portion. Definitely give us a CPA.
It's in their name,
So,
but there's gonna be a tax on top of that, if they owned it, you know, since it was $50 an acre.
so here's what I haven't confirmed yet, but I heard it was the current gift tax rate for inherited land, inherited real estate is hypothetically 20% on the difference from the time you inherited to the time you sell. So if you were to buy a property, or if you were to inherit a property worth $100,000, a year later you sell it for $105,000, you're taxed on the $5,000. Hypothetical numbers, I don't know this can be exact, quote me. That's the current plan. That's the current tax implications on that type of deal. Whereas what it looks like they're going to push for, got to go through several layers of government, would be that they would actually take that 20% and tax it back to the original purchase price that it was. So if your parents bought that house for $20,000, you inherited it, and it was worth $100,000, but then you sell it a year later for $105,000, you're taxed 20% on the difference from $20,000 to $105,000 instead of $100,000 to $105,000. Does that make sense? I mean, it doesn't make sense. I have to say that, but
Yeah, it's more, they're trying to get more.
exactly. Yeah, that's what I see coming down the pipeline for taxation on that. However, that's just the inherited portion. I don't know, it might be like whichever the bigger burden is, but there's going to be another conversation that we have around the capital gains. So you're obviously being taxed on that inherited capital gains, and that might be the only gains that they're going to tax on. There could be a precedent or priority on those taxations. I'm not for sure. That's definitely where some, an accountant skilled in real estate would definitely be a good friend on that one to make sure they can do that.
Yeah.
With no surprises, because again, that goes back to the sale process. And if they want to divide it, because if they want to divide it and sell it off separately, this is kind of the deal I'm in right now. We've got like 6 properties that a buyer is selling to purchase one property, and they're 1031 flipping all these rental houses into another income producing single property. So the 2 buyers on these income, on these rentals, and we've had to tell them, please hold on, so we can get these other 4 properties under contract. So then we can close basically simultaneously on 6 and then buy this other. Because we got to get the timeline for that 1031 for both, because it's considered a single business, something like that. So it's kind of a weird deal. Some of those houses, I believe, are not considered part of that entity, so they're outside of that 1031 limitation. And the 1031 company said they can use those funds to purchase the same property as a separate 1031 transaction, basically for down payment. So there's going to be a large sum that they're financing. They can use the lump sum as part of that 1031 exchange on the additional sales. It's gray, hairy area that, like I said, I don't know their own expertise. So definitely talk to them, because again, if it's a single property like that, they would be dividing into, you said 11 acres on a 60-acre parcel. 3, if you've got 4 or 5 lots in there.
So there's 11 acres per lot, so there's 11 lots.
Oh, because it's across the
Because
street.
that's 122, because it's 127 acres. Yeah.
Yeah, you would almost. So it's another level of your,
That's if they
Right.
invest the difference then.
yeah, so.
But if they're not, they just want to take the money. There's 2 brothers that want to sell it, take the money and run.
So yeah, if they want to, you would, yeah, definitely check out that tax implication. Because it would almost be, yeah, if they're just taking the money, they're gonna face the taxes, but they want to be aware of those taxes. Timing won't be an issue if that's the case.
Right. But it's going to be capital gains or gift tax, one or the other, can't be both.
Potentially, I'm not for sure on how they would stack it, but they could.
And then whether it's based on the value when they inherited it versus the sale price and the difference between the two, and that's what you're taxed on.
That's what I'm led with.
And then the rate of
Yeah.
that tax.
That's what we dealt with, is the value. No, we haven't dealt with.
And who determines the value? If you look at what they pay taxes on, that value is going to be low versus what they're going to sell it for, that's going to be high.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, they're gonna look at. CPA. They're gonna look at CPA. I'm gonna send you the CPA. Yeah, because that's an argument. That's an argument to be said, and its ag value, it was worth, $27 an acre. But its residential market value is $27,000 an acre. I don't think it's on that.
Right.
So,
And then the tax is more if you do break it down versus sell the whole thing.
and CPA might say, yeah, you can take that out of that. And do your rollback taxes.
Well, that's why you got to do 11 acres because there's no rollback. It's got to be 10 acres
Yeah, because then you can sell it as exempt.
and there's no rollback.
But to get max value, again, you're going per acre, apples to apples. When you break it down to 10 acres versus 197, the exact reason you're doing it, it's worth substantially more. Yeah, I would get a CPA involved in that for sure.
So they got all these extra expenses, right? You got to get the survey, not have to buy a landman, right? And then you got the CPA for this bill.
Well,
And then taxed on top of that.
And depending on how it's structured, I mean, if you've already got road frontage for all 11 lots, that's one thing, but if you gotta put in a road.
No, there's road.
Or move water lines or anything like that.
If I were to call a listing agent on a particular property and ask them these questions, and they're like, I have no idea, where would I get these?
A lot of them aren't gonna know. I would want to send this over to them and say, can you get these answers?
That's not a good answer.
Yeah, and this is just compiled from all the crazy questions I've been asked. And I mean, it gets pretty in depth and you're like, well, who would even think of that? Trust me, I'll probably add more to this by the time the year's over with and all of that. I've had people ask about airports, soil types, very common question. Total tax cemeteries. Nobody cemeteries on the property. Texas, you don't necessarily have to disclose it. However, if there's one on the property, there could be an easement to it for the family. Yeah,
Well, that's
and
a-
it might not show up on the survey.
I've been told, just you have to call the city and find out.
Yeah, well, you can research cemeteries online. But yeah, a lot of this, depth of ponds and lakes. I usually ask, has the pond ever gone dry? That, if I get a no, or if I get a sketchy answer, then I'm like, yeah, I probably have. If I get a hard no, never seen it dry, it's amazing, it gets pretty low, but it never goes dry. And I'm pretty much believing that, and that's like, okay, it's leaving that. Now, if it's a lake, and you buy it right now, I say lake, like anything greater than like 3 or 4 acres, something sizable on a single property. I mean, if it's like Sam Raven or Cedar Creek, obviously I know that's not. I mean, like a private lake on a ranch, I'm gonna be like, you know, has this ever gone dry? And if they're like, it gets pretty low, then I'm gonna question the structuring, design, and development of the lake, because it should be designed to hold water current. A lot of times you can look at the dam and the backside of the dam and see what's going on from an engineering standpoint. Again, this is just.
I don't know, like, my lake goes dry all the time, and I live on my river. My backyard is right over, and it goes dry all the time.
Yeah. So, and you can look that up. I mean, you can find the fluctuation map for those lakes, and it'll show you like where the, I guess management level. What they call that, then that shows fluctuations on most lakes. You can get that information. As far as when I say big lakes, reservoirs.
Because that increases the value, right? But if they go dry, like creeks and rivers and stuff, they go dry. I've got one right now that's dry.
Live creek versus a dry creek or seasonal creek that catches runoff. You know, if there's springs on the property, or if there's a spring in a lake, that's always good. And usually sellers are aware of that, and they'll want to tell you. A lot of times you still end up in small town areas to where it's the local city realtor that gets these farm and ranch listings, and they still don't have a clue about farm and ranch. They don't know the questions to ask. You send this over to them, they look at it and they're like, oh, dang, I gotta work. But they're probably gonna file this away and go, next time I take a listing, I'm gonna get all that information. I mean, my listing description for this last place we did was 4 pages long. And that's because I just send that to everyone that asks me a single question. I'm like, hey, here's all the info. Let me know if it's not covered in. And if they ask me a question that's not covered in there, I go back and I edit it. And then I say, okay, yeah, here's your answer. And then I send that to the next agent that asks me. Do it once and you're done. And then on Lands of America, Lands of Texas, you can put a 4-page long description. I make a snippet of it for them to last. Again, Lands of Texas is.
So there's a cost to do that. Are we allowed to do that? Like the MLS again?
Lands of Texas?
Yeah.
No, I that's what I was saying after I mentioned that. So as far as input goes, I think it might be, you can double check on what our office covers. It might automatically syndicate with the limited information from our MLS. But I have an upgraded membership that allows me to put that much information in. And I use a different a mapping service that allows us to link our custom maps in there and things of that nature. It's a farm and ranch real estate it's a whole wild animal of its own, and there's so much more to it.
Is there a specific like soil type that's more conducive to like putting a lake in or a pond in if it doesn't already have one, or does that really matter?
There is clay. Clay is good. That doesn't mean that if you walk out in the pasture and it feels like a volleyball court, that it's a bad place to put a lake. Because a lot of times it's just a couple feet down, or maybe just a few inches down, it turns to clay.
What's about like 10 feet of right?
It depends on the size. You get out in the 4 or 5 plus acres, you're looking at 50, 60 out for a lake that size. Let's go right. It's a lot of hours in the, because you usually have a survey crew out and engineering and design, and it's a lot more going into it than just digging a hole in the low spot.
I was looking up YouTube videos on how to.
Yeah, you can usually get just a small pond, like, you know, a 1/10 of an acre pond in a pasture that's already got a low spot. It might only run you $3,000 to $5,000 for, you know, Joe Bob down the road with the dozer to come push some earth piles out the water.
Yeah.
Those aren't usually that bad, but when you want it to be an aesthetic feature and they're utilizing the lay of the land, or if they have to come in and change the lay of the land, because they can come in and, you know, move around 20 acres of land, make it do what they want for the water flow.
Yeah.
And then build you a 10-acre, 20 or 50 acre lake, whatever you want. It's kind of, sky's the limit, but small something just to water cows, $3,500, $5,000. But the clay liner is mandatory and necessary, and it's not a deal breaker if it's not available. People sell clay, so you can just call somebody with a bulldozer and say, hey, I need a line put in, they'll ask what the pipe is, and then like, okay, I'm gonna have to put your clay liner in. And it's gonna take, however many loads of clay, and then that's gonna get expensive.
And that's for just tanks, ponds.
Ponds, lakes, yeah. It's usually it's a quick phone call to someone that has a machinery company, a heavy equipment company in the area to say, hey, I'm looking at buying this place off of whatever road. And they're going to go, oh, okay, yeah, that's old Wilson Road. Yeah, and they're learning clay down there for about 2 miles. And then you're like, oh, okay, so you've been out there. Like, yeah, we want to build a lake out there. They all know this stuff. Like, it's crazy. I showed a guy a piece of property yesterday with his agent, and he was the one that 20 years ago put metal on the barn roofs on that property. And his wife was there, and she was like, my uncle used to live in this little manager house 20 years ago. I was like, okay, I'm going to start asking y'all questions about this property then. So the locals know this stuff. So you just call them, someone's dozer service, and they're going to be, oh, yeah, that's a good property out there. We can put one in no time. They just know this stuff.
So you call a barn that has stalls in it, you upgrade that to a stable. And if it's like a big shed, you still call it a barn.
No, you probably won't hear me use the word stable. It's kind of like a Hollywood term. There are stables, I guess it's more of a European term. Stables are one thing. We just call them barns. We have show barns, which is usually the more luxury side of horse barns, kit barns, show barns, and kit barns, like you can buy pieces of. People usually know those brands like One Master. So within the industry, we kind of look at those differently. So if another agent in the farm and range division wants to call me and say, hey, what kind of barn is that? I might just say, oh, it's a full barn, it's gutted, or it's just, it's a show barn, or it's a barn master, it's a kit barn. Or I say, if it's a show barn, then I'm like, it's got a 14-foot aisle and 14 by 14 installed concrete walls. Like, we go into details on those and get into, we pretty much, like every industry has their own lingo. When you get into that stuff, we've got our own lingo for most of it. And again, regionally, I'll hear something from someone in Arizona. We do a lot of back and forth business with Arizona, California, Florida, New Mexico. And I'm like, when you say this, what do you mean? And then they're like, oh, this. And I'm like, oh, we call that this. They're like, oh, yeah, same thing. So it's a lot of times it's just asking questions again. But
so this is concrete walls. It's,
if it's a workshop, equipment shed, in the description, now if it's annoying, but I see the point in it, and I'd probably do it too. So when you put it in MLS, I would probably select barn and workshop. And then in the description, I might put like, 40 by 50. And then a little bit more detail. So there's like a 40 by 50 equipment shed that could be used as a barn or dirt floor equipment shed. I definitely hit on the floor type because that gives a lot more insight to the person that's reading it that knows what they're looking for. I'm not going to go waste my time if someone's looking for show barn and pictures of it or a picture of it. So you can, from someone in the industry that knows what barn they want, they're going to know from the outside of the barn if it's going to have what they want on the inside.
So talking about utilities, so if there are utilities out of the road and on the property, it's easier if that down. But if there aren't any utilities, what are the challenges?
Finding where they're nearest. If it's finding where they're nearest, and you can call The co-op usually are dealing with, or private water supply. Out in those areas, an electric co-op or water co-op or private water supply, usually your three options you're looking at. Call the electric co-op, say, here's the address, I don't see any power lines around. What's it gonna take to get electricity to this location? They might say, thank God you called, because the guy next door has been wearing this out, and we need about 2 more people to get on board, and we can do it at this cost. Or they say, well, nobody else wants electricity down there, so it looks like, to get it there, if that owner wanted it, it would cost X amount. So if you can split it up among the neighbors, it's one thing. If you're the only person that's gonna be out more. Going back to water is about the same way. There's private water supplies, and they might tell you, oh, that water line is actually at that property, it's just across the street, so you just have to bore under the road, and you can have water. They might be $2,500
Are you at
plus
the
a meter.
office?
Or they might say, oh, it actually dead ends two driveways down, and we just need to put them in there. So it's just a phone call, and they can usually give you.
Are you at the office? Are you? Oh, okay.